Welcome to NTD News. I'm Cindy Drucare. The United States had weapons ready to fire on targets in Iran after the country shot down a U.S. drone. NTD's Holly Kellum has a story on what happened at the final hour.
President Trump confirmed reports this morning that the U.S. was ready to strike Iran after it shot down a U.S. drone over the Strait of Hormuz on Thursday. "We were cocked and loaded to retaliate last night on 3 different sites. When I asked how many will die," Trump wrote, a general told him 150 people. 10 minutes before the strike, I stopped it, he wrote. Iran said the U.S. surveillance drone had entered Iranian airspace, but the U.S. says it was an international airspace. The New York Times reported yesterday that the U.S. was poised to strike, citing multiple senior administration officials. Several media later reported the same, all citing anonymous sources. In Trump's tweet confirming the reports this morning, he said that killing 150 people for an unmanned drone was, quote, not proportionate. This is consistent with comments he made yesterday during a meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Orders, but we didn't have a man or woman in the drone. We had nobody in the drone.
Are you still open?
It would have made a big difference, let me tell you.
The Federal Aviation Administration warned U.S. airlines about flying over the Strait of Hormuz, cautioning them that they may get struck unintentionally. Australia's Qantas, British Airways, Dutch carrier KLM, Germany's Lufthansa, Malaysia Airlines, and Singapore Airlines all announced shortly after that they were avoiding the area as well. Holly Kellum, NTD News.
Every year, the U.S. State Department issues a report card on religious freedom across the world. NTD's Holly Kellum has more on which countries' grades improved and which did not.
The State Department today released its annual Religious Freedom Report for 2018. Among the changes, Uzbekistan is no longer classified as a country of particular concern, the first time in 13 years.
1,500 religious prisoners have been freed.
Pakistan was downgraded from being on a special watch list to now a country of particular concern.
We continue to call for their release and encourage the government to appoint an envoy to address the various religious freedom concerns.
Secretary Pompeo also noted the poor treatment of the Baha'i in Iran, the Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia, and a number of spiritual and religious groups in China.
Falun Gong practitioners, Christians, and Tibetan Buddhists among them.
This year, the State Department added a special section to the report on the Xinjiang region of China, where over 1 million Muslim Uyghurs are reportedly being held in labor camps. The report also highlights China's grim practice of forcibly removing the organs of prisoners of conscience.
This should shock everyone's conscience.
China remains a country of particular concern, a title it has held since 1999. Because of that, the U.S. restricts the sale of crime control and detection instruments and equipment to China.
For all those that run roughshod over religious freedom, I'll say this: the United States is watching, and you will be held to account.
Holly Kellum, NTD News.
This week, a People's Tribunal in London concluded that prisoners of conscience in China are being murdered for their organs. A former intern at a military hospital in China who witnessed the crime firsthand speaks out. He told NTD's Alec Rusick his story.
The event took place in the 90s while George Jung was about to graduate from medical school. I was doing an internship at the Shenyang Army General Hospital. At that time, I took part in a military mission. Along with 3 doctors and 2 nurses, and under armed escort, he was driven in an ambulance to an area around Dalian in China's northeast. The ambulance drove to a very remote place in the wilderness. Then we heard a gunshot. It wasn't long before several soldiers carried a man over. At the time, I saw that his neck was all covered by blood, and his throat was bloody. Jung witnessed doctors removing kidneys from the prisoner. He motioned for me to cut one particular blood vessel. As soon as it was cut, his blood instantly flowed out, and it was hot. I was panicking and very shocked at the time. But I saw that the other people present had no expression on their faces. After the kidneys, the doctors instructed him to take out the eyeballs. I said that I couldn't do it at all. I was near collapse at that time, and my body kept on shaking. One of the doctors removed the eyeballs, and after all was done, instructed George to stuff the body into a bag, which was carried away by soldiers. I asked, "What about the leftover bodies?" He said that there was another military vehicle that would destroy or burn them. After they came back to Shenyang, he witnessed the organs being implanted into a waiting patient. He was told to sit aside and take a rest. The whole thing shook him profoundly. After I went home, I had a high fever for a few days. Afterwards, I talked with someone at the hospital to tell them that I would not go there anymore. I said I could work elsewhere, but I wouldn't do this job again. To this day, George is haunted by the memory of that day in the mountains and wilderness. Who was the victim? I thought he also has parents. His family didn't know anything about this cruel event. He decided to leave China. But I know that the Chinese Communist Party would assassinate people who are aware of this to silence them. So when I thought about this, I thought that since I'm alive, I should stand up to testify. Because tens of thousands of families in China don't know that their loved ones died in such a cruel way. On Monday, an independent People's Tribunal in London unanimously concluded that within the People's Republic of China, or PRC,
forced organ harvesting had happened in multiple places in the PRC and on multiple occasions for a period of at least 20 years and is continuing.
With multiple testimonies from different groups, the only missing side at the tribunal was the Chinese Communist Party, which claimed that the accusations are politically motivated.
Protesters in Hong Kong surrounding police headquarters after demands made on the government were not met. NTD's Matt Gnezda has an update from the streets of Hong Kong.
I'm standing outside Hong Kong police headquarters with thousands of young Hong Kongers. They're asking the police to release people who were arrested last week. Protesters had given the Hong Kong government a list of demands and a deadline. That deadline, last night, was not met. They wanted the government to completely withdraw a controversial extradition bill. If passed, it would allow Hong Kong authorities to send criminal suspects to mainland China for trial. Protesters also wanted the government to stop calling the anti-extradition bill protest on June 12th a riot. That's because while protesting is protected under Hong Kong law, rioting is punishable by up to 10 years in prison. And they want the government to set up an independent commission to investigate police actions on June 12th, including the police launching tear gas into unarmed crowds. When those demands weren't met, protesters came here to demand dialogue with the police. A dialogue the police don't seem to want to give them. So protesters surrounded the police headquarters. They also blocked several main roads and shut down 2 other government buildings in the heart of Hong Kong. Protesters in Hong Kong have been keeping their faces covered in recent years. They're afraid they'll be caught on surveillance and then prosecuted.
We are afraid of the police because they could arrest us.
Today's protests were peaceful. People passed out water, and they made sure first aid could get through. Crowds even parted for an ambulance. As night fell, protesters remained outside police headquarters, and the size of the crowds only seemed to grow. So far, there is no end in sight for what's been nearly 2 weeks of protests in the city. This is Matt Gnezda reporting for NTD News in Hong Kong.
Firefighters in Philadelphia battling a massive fire today after an explosion at an oil refinery. Some witnesses saying it felt like a nuclear bomb going off.
Multiple explosions visible from miles away went off at the Philadelphia Energy Solutions refinery around 4 a.m., said to have been felt as far away as South Jersey. According to the company, the fire broke out at the Girard Point section of the 335,000 barrels per day refinery.
I seen an explosion, and then I seen a second explosion, and then I seen a third explosion. A third explosion rocked my truck.
The plant is the largest and oldest oil refinery on the East Coast, with a plant on site since 1870. Aerial video of the scene shows significant damage to the complex engulfed in flames. The incident comes as the refiner is struggling financially, slashing worker benefits and scaling back capital projects, raising the question of whether the company will have enough money to rebuild.
According to 3 unnamed U.S. officials, U.S. immigration authorities will launch a sweeping effort on Sunday to deport recently arrived families who are in the United States illegally.
The move comes after President Donald Trump's tweet about the operation, saying that they will be removed as fast as they come in. In February, ICE sent about 2,000 letters to families with court-ordered removals across 10 U.S. cities, including Houston, Chicago, Miami, and Los Angeles. Earlier this week, Mark Morgan, the acting director of ICE, said the agency would target families that have received a removal order from a U.S. immigration court. Morgan said ICE wanted to deport families who had recently arrived illegally in the United States to discourage more Central Americans from arriving. The number of migrants apprehended crossing the U.S.-Mexico border surged in May to the highest level since 2006.
Planned Parenthood is suing Missouri health officials after they refused to renew the license of the state's only abortion clinic located in the St. Louis area. If it closes, Missouri will become the first state without an abortion clinic in almost 50 years.
Court documents show that the renewal request was denied on the grounds that officials were unable to interview 7 of the clinic's physicians over potential deficient practices. However, on June 10th, State Circuit Court Judge Michael Stelzer issued a preliminary injunction. He said that the state needed to make an official decision on the license by today before it could be reviewed. It was originally set to expire on May 31st. According to Planned Parenthood spokesperson Jesse Lauder, the abortion provider will challenge the decision in a court hearing scheduled for today. The legal battle in Missouri began after Governor Mike Parson, a Republican, signed a bill on May 24th banning abortion from the 8th week of pregnancy onwards. If the clinic were to close, Missouri would become the only U.S. state without a legal abortion clinic. 12 states have passed laws restricting abortion access this year, including Ohio, Georgia, and Kentucky.
President Trump said that this election is between radical socialism and his plan for freedom and democracy. NTD's Miguel Moreno spoke with the former editor of Breitbart, who said that this radical left platform is benefiting the president.
In the heart of progressivism, conservative leaders gathered to both discuss politics and encourage New York's young Republicans to take a firm stance against the far left. Councilman Joe Borelli, One America's Jack Posobiec, and former editor-in-chief of Breitbart Raheem Kassam described the battle or war between American and progressive ideologies. But Kassam said that the Democrats may be doing the president a service.
Well, I think it's interesting. The Democrats, I think, are giving Trump a lot of wiggle room in this election. They're pulling further to the left. They're proposing things that Americans don't see as American.
New York's Mayor de Blasio is among the 23 Democratic candidates. He announced a universal health care plan in January that would include coverage for illegal immigrants. And recently, he campaigned in Iowa.
Literally, not one person, in one poll, they could not find one blessed human in Iowa to say, yeah, what you got going on in New York, I want that for America.
A Des Moines poll conducted for CNN showed that de Blasio was no one's first or second choice for president in Iowa.
If you go to most places in America that aren't New York City and aren't Los Angeles, people don't identify with the modern Democratic Party at all.
Many Democratic candidates show support for the socialist Green New Deal, abolishing ICE, and removing the Electoral College. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
A strong showing on Wall Street today for U.S. stocks. Here's NTD reporter Jeremy Sandberg with the factors that are affecting investor sentiment.
Vice President Mike Pence called off a planned speech on China policy today in an effort to deter escalating tensions with Beijing, according to a White House official. The Dow climbed above its record closing level in midday trading before dropping slightly and finishing the day lower. The S&P 500 also hit an intraday record high, but then stepped back as the rising tensions between the United States and Iran kept investors on edge. Trump said today he aborted a military strike on Iran in response to Iran shooting down a U.S. drone, but the possibility of a U.S. retaliation pushed crude prices higher and helped lift the energy sector. Chip stocks fell after the U.S. Commerce Department banned 5 more Chinese entities in the interest of national security and foreign policy after blacklisting Huawei last month. President Donald Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping are expected to restart trade talks at the G20 summit in Japan next week.
President Trump is calling on the Democrat Party in Congress to approve the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, and it's gaining support from across the aisle under the shadow of broad economic threats coming from China.
With the Mexican Senate approving NAFTA's replacement this week, and Canada in the final stage of its own review process, the Republican Party hopes that the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement will get congressional approval before the end of August. But as the Democrat Party controls the House, some members are still seeking to amend the trade agreement by strengthening labor enforcement measures.
Things that the Democrats want to make sure it's part of the implementing language. So it is going to happen. We're hoping maybe before the August break, but it'll probably be in the fall, but it will come up to a vote. I feel very confident about that. And it will be successful.
U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer said in a congressional hearing this week that there is still room to strengthen the implementation of the agreement. He also said that he would work with Democrats to solve other issues.
He's done a good job in the sense that he sat down with different stakeholders. He sat down with Democrats. He's addressed a lot of the labor issues that the Democrats wanted, especially since they were not there in the 1990s.
Republican Congressman Will Hurd said the two parties must cooperate to ensure USMCA goes through, so the United States can be in a better position to deal with China on broader economic issues.
We should be talking about how are we using North American competitiveness to go after other markets and deal with China. China is the real threat to our broader economy, not just in the U.S., but entire North America.
He said the next step is discussing how to move global supply chains away from China and direct them into Mexico and Canada.
You may not have heard, but today is World Music Day, or Fête de la Musique. NTD reporter David Vives met singers in training at the Paris Grand Palais, where they performed Russian opera for their very first time.
The last few seconds before the show starts seem to last longer than the others. When he enters the stage, it's time to give his best. June 21st is an occasion for all music lovers in France. It's a time when musicians go onto all stages, including the streets, to listen, perform, and enjoy what they encounter. At the Paris Grand Palais, the classic arts took to the stage, with a performance featuring mezzo-soprano singer Yaroslava Kozina and students of the prestigious Conservatoire de Paris. Singing old Russian opera was a challenge for these young musicians. But guided by pianist and professor Jean-Marc Pont Marchesi, the experience was worth the effort.
They have to learn the score of the music. It's where we check that a student's voice is appropriate to what he wants to sing. Then comes the learning of the Russian language.
Under Soviet Russia, fine arts were gradually destroyed, and musicians who stayed had to work for the communist regime, creating propaganda. The concert also pays tribute to the courage of those who endure the regime's crackdown on arts.
Every day, those musicians faced a lot of anxiety, but they wanted to fight against injustice, fear, and the destruction around them through their music. They put their strength into it, and I'm very happy that we could learn and perform their creations.
The songs talk about imaginary places, from artists dreaming of a better world and holding on to their sweet remaining memories, sometimes to celebrate the old days, sometimes to forget the reality.
Researchers at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland trained 3 grey seals to copy human speech and song. NTD's Tiffany Meyer tells us what they said.
The seals were first trained to copy sequences of their own sounds and then create melodies in their pitch. Human vowel sounds were later presented to the animals, which they also copied. One seal named Zola was particularly good at copying melodies played to her, including up to 10 notes of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. The study gave the researchers a better understanding of the evolution of vocal learning and human language. It also suggested that gray seals could be used to study speech disorders, since they use their vocal tracts the same way as humans.
And that's all for today's NTD News. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Cindy Drucare.